Here we go.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to sort of chat just till we let you all in. There's 65 people. I know there's a lot of people flowing in, so we'll start in a couple of moments. I'll do a short introduction for Dr. Richard Young, and then we'll hand over straight to him. So we will just give another minute or so while our IT guys let everyone into the room. We're up to 115 now, which is great. And then we'll start in a minute or so. Thank you. Right, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, sorry, I should say. I hope you can see me and hear me. We're just going to do, like I said, a short introduction for Richard, and then we'll hand over to get him ready, and he'll talk you through tonight's presentation. So we're really lucky to have him. He came highly recommended. He's someone that has got a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge in his particular area and expertise around performance. And as has been the way with all of our speakers, really, we called him up. We asked would he be keen to do something for our community, and he put his hand up straight away, which is testament to his character and his attitude as well, that he's here and willing to give up his time. So just a bit of a short bit of background. He's a gentleman who has 30 years experience in performance largely across sport, but also business. He is an Olympian himself. He competed at the 1988 Seoul Olympics. Since then, he's been involved in a further 8 Olympic Games across 3 different nations, either as a coach, an advisor, or someone in a high performance capacity. He has a PhD in medical science. He has then got some further targeted research into the subtle differences and the nuances between Olympic medal winners and those that have just missed out on the podium. So that real finite, granular sort of stuff that he's going to talk about tonight. And his book Simplify, which is available, it's on sale now, was written for anyone who wants to accelerate their performance, build better relationships, instill some positive habits, whether that be at home, at work, at school. I know we've got a few boys in tonight as well. And yeah, the rave reviews of the book, which is why we've got him with us. And it really is a pleasure to introduce him. So Dr. Richard Young, the floor is yours, and we're really looking forward to you speaking to our community tonight. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. Great, thanks for the introduction. And if I just get either a thumbs up or a chat that you can hear me before I start, that's going to be.
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot. Well, you probably can't tell the accent. Born in Newcastle, so same as Andrew and David. So it's kind of a Geordie mafia here, I think. But grew up in Canada, and now I'm in the Riviera of Dunedin, and that's where we live. And we were up in Titirangi when we moved from England. So I worked in sport in England, and then it started a program called the Tech and Innovation Program in Britain, and the Kiwis wanted that. So we moved, settled in, and looked at the map and thought, well, Titirangi, working in Albany, that looks pretty good. No, it wasn't. So I commute from Bath, London when we were in England, and then I came here and it was a longer commute. But anyways, lots of thinking time in the car. That's what it gave me, and then we moved here. 4 kids, 3 are in high school here, 1 in intermediate, and so I know the pain and suffering you are going through with further lockdown and what it's like to learn when you're not with people. So some people do well with that, and others don't. It's kind of finding your niche, but the chaos will end, and so that's the reason for this kind of focused, high performance conversation here. Is how people adapt and how they respond. Because sport in the past 2 years, you will recognize how different the calendar has been. No spectators, just two-dimensional screens of clapping and cardboard cutouts, and how people adapt and how they respond to that. And so this is a principles based I'm going to have with you based on research into medalists and non-medalists, some areas that they found to be most successful for their success, areas that would often fall over, and I can give you some heads up on where you can read more. So there's free stuff on the website I've got that talks about these behaviors and things to apply. And the book, as Andrew had mentioned, is the system of how it's all integrated. So it's a pleasure to be here. And particularly, it's a fantastic concept. Parents, teachers, and students learn together, and I see the lineup, and Kerry Evans I know, and I've heard him speak, and fantastic. So it's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully you get something of use from this. That's the point. There'll be two parts that you're probably going to spot as an awareness part, like, oh, that's interesting, and then a decision part. So hopefully there's something in the decision part that means, it can have an impact on you. And this isn't just interesting, thing that can link to your. So I'm trying to pitch this for all audiences. So the students, welcome. So I would treat you like the athlete, and the parents would be the coaches and the support staff, and the teachers would be the high performance directors and the leaders. So it's like a sport audience here. So if I move to a couple of things around the session, I got a couple of slides here that I can show you. This is really about personal excellence, and the examples may be Olympic, but they are directly applicable to any areas of life, because how people do it in the Olympics, it's appealing to us. It's every 4 years. It is there's a lot of spectators. It's a big event, and you win and lose in public, but then it's how do they do that? And when you hear athletes speak, and you hear even famous people speak, they're usually telling you what they did, and you don't often hear what they didn't do. And that's really the crux of high performance, is not to do. So in amongst what looks like chaos, there's a rock solid approach that people have to their routines and so there's a book called Atomic Habits, which is an excellent book if you have a chance to read that. And in there, James Clear is the author, and he writes about you don't lift the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So this conversation is about systems and principles, not components. Like when you look at an athlete and you hear they're not lazy, and they're diligent, they're on time. Well, that's useless. Yeah, you can't do anything with that. So the research that I was doing, I was looking into the principles. So what is it about what they've learned that other people can use? So not their characteristics and attributes and personalities, pointless. So what system and how have they gone? There we go. Thank you, Tim. You read about the bikes, you read about the innovation. There's a whole lot that looks very attractive, but it just adds more, and it adds more, and it gets very, very complicated very quick. So that's what we're going to talk about, is what they have reduced. And the analogy would be like a lockdown. So when we lose everything, suddenly we realize what's important to us. And you probably realize that in your life, what's really important to you. And it may have surprised you. You know, for us, we started playing board games. We didn't realize how much we love board games and good family time and back to board games. For a few things that we learned, and now we can choose what to put back. And so in sport, calendars wiped out, no spectators for some of the events, teams going under, clubs going under. Now, what do we choose to put back? So I'll give you a bit of a heads up on sort of the Olympic performance bit. So some preamble data here. How hard is it to win? So we'll come to this one first. Here we go. Sound is clicked off. Now it's back on. Okay, I'll keep that button out of my waving hands here. So if I go back to this slide, the world top 5 take 70% of the Olympic medals. And out of the top 6 of 16, they take 15%. So I don't know if you heard this part, but you basically know who's going to medal before the Olympics even start. Well, then you look at the Olympics itself, and back in 76, there was no system. Basically, there was East Bloc, but there wasn't a sports science system. There wasn't a coaching system. It started to evolve. In 88, science and coaching became closer together. 2000 was the start of systems really starting to roll, like the Aussie system and the British system, and then technology started to come in. So it's become way more systematic in Olympic sport. And so now the top 5 take the majority of medals. So you know 4 years out who's going to win. That's why the Olympic preparation is so appealing, because you think, well, how do they do that? How do they become that good so quick? And the time's ticking. So there's a stopwatch going, and there's a physical clock ticking, because you just don't have the physical capability for a long time. So most athletes are maybe 2 Olympics, and most of them just 1 Olympics. So you have a short window of time. So it kind of reminds me when my son came back after Santa gift giving, and my young guy in year 7, and he came back with this giant box of puzzle pieces, thousands and thousands of puzzle pieces. And he said, "Oh, Dad, let's build this." And I said, "Oh, great, let's do that. And where's the picture?" And there was no picture. And that is a lot like high performance. There is no picture. And so we need to figure out the principles. So he started with the corners, then we found the edges. That's high performance. So in sport, we need to know where the corners are, where the edges are, and then we fill in our own picture. Because taking a picture from somebody else, like best practice, you're behind the 8 ball. You're trying to adapt to someone else's world. And really the best have found their own system and created their own picture. And they do that through principles, and that's what we're going to talk about. So you'll have heard of this. Some research into how long it takes an expert to become an expert, and this line in the sand, 10,000 hours. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about it. Anders Ericsson was the researcher in the US, and he discovered this, but he didn't expect the world to see 10,000 hours as a reference point. So him and Malcolm Gladwell have kind of been at odds with each other over whether the research actually stacks up. But really, for this conversation, it's about 10,000 hours of what? That's the important part. It's not 10,000 hours, it's 10,000 hours of the right stuff. And the best have learned what to subtract. And it's a core difference maker between a repeat medalist and a non-medalist is the addition versus subtraction. So quite a few, and you'll know it yourself, no problem adding. Subtracting, it gets very hard. And our brain isn't even wired for subtracting. We didn't evolve to subtract, we evolved to add. That's how we've come this far. And if you look at social media and you look at, buying habits and things, it's always more. And sport is the ultimate of more. There's got to be something else I can do, a different bike, a different wheel set. And when I was racing, I was fully into the more. So I was heavy into technology. And I filled my tires up with 200 PSI of helium. I coated my suit in Teflon. We were all into this and just adding and adding and adding. And we realized, boy, it's complex. And when I started coaching, I became more conscious of this. I didn't want to waste people's time with all these new ideas. And we didn't know what the basics were. And we realized we hadn't actually learned how to subtract. And the analogy, if you've played Jenga, that is the perfect analogy of sport and system thinking. So if it's the game with the blocks, and so there's a whole set of blocks and you add them up and you add them up and you add them up, and then you go around and take turns pulling the blocks off. And then when the tower collapses, that person has lost. But if you look around the room, you can even imagine it. So as you're building blocks, it doesn't matter. They may be off a little bit. It doesn't matter. You just build, build, build. Everyone's chatting and building and building, building. Then it's time to subtract. And you have a look around the room. And now everyone's looking over top. How's the balance? Checking the sides. That's what system thinking looks like. So we're starting to see interconnections. And the people who are subtracting have turned out to be the repeat medal winners. So they protect a system that they have honed through subtraction. And so I write about this in the book, that an accelerator for new performers, and performance, I don't mean sport, we're all performing. We perform as a teacher, we perform as a parent, we perform as a student, we're always performing. So it's about communicating. It's about delivering what you know exactly right at the right time, as best you can under sometimes crazy conditions like now. But we're not taught to subtract. And there's research that says that is not our first thought. Our first thought is to add. And there was a research done with a Lego bridge, and it was offside. It was lopsided. So there were 5 blocks on this leg of the bridge and 4 blocks on this leg. So you can tell there's 2 options. And every adult in the study put a brick on. And when they gave it to a young kid, they took a brick off. And the research continued on into other areas of cooking and music and how to come up with a loop. And young people pulled notes off and adults added. So somehow we get into this frame of add works because we see something, it's tangible. We're told this in life, more is better, but actually less works. And you may have heard the cliche, get the basics right, and less is more, but it is. And in high performance, the consistent pattern is less. So if I show you an example of some old data, so over 16 years of Olympic Games, what did the athletes talk about? And so we just analyzed text, added them all up, put a ring around it. And then we checked to see, based on their performance, who talked about what and how much did they talk about. And so when you get to top 9 in the world, you basically own everything. You're talking about a whole lot of stuff. Then you get to 4 to 8 in the world, you talk about less stuff. And then you get to be a medalist, and the ring has narrowed even more. And then you get to be a repeat medalist, and it's narrowed even further. So now you're right at this tiny spot. And so the 4 to 8s would say, well, what are they talking about? Give it to us so we can get moving. But really the point is they are all exactly where they need to be. And it's about learning, and learning is accelerating the ring. And if you look at what they're learning how to reduce. So they're not expanding the ring, they're reducing the ring. And this was the first sort of trigger of, well, what's happening in sport? It looks very complicated, but they have very simple sentences. These repeat medalists, they were all interviewed, and they talk about similar things. And when we asked them 3 questions, what would you keep, start, and stop for the next Olympics? 5% of the athlete population were repeat medalists, and they owned 80% of the stops. So they were actively saying, no, don't need it, don't want it. I know who I work with, I know what works. And they have focused on this learning accelerator. And so most would think a learning accelerator is try it all, do it all, and figure out what works. But it's actually Jenga game, reducing and strategically reducing. And so there were a number of components that fit into this reduction that we can talk about. So if you look across all their priorities that they've got, and you add up the people who are, I wouldn't say low performers, really. They were new performers. So we interviewed a lot of rookies. And since for the past 3 years, I've been consulting. So I consult with Olympic sport in different countries and business, because the model works in business. And in comparing new performers to high performers, the difference is how much they're doing and how active they are in protecting the good parts of what they're doing. And there was also a study that looked just like this normal distribution here that we've got, that McKinsey did over 5 years, and they tracked 250 companies, and they were in the Fortune 500, and they tracked them to see which ones were shifting over a cycle, basically an Olympic cycle. And the ones that shifted were actively reducing. They were not just reducing staff, they were reducing the targets, the components that they were focusing on. They reduced their goals. They reduced the attention they were giving to a big, wide group of things, and they tucked it right down. The ones that stayed in the middle, these average areas right here in the middle, what they were doing, and there were 75% of the companies stayed the same. So they didn't improve, but what they were doing was working on efficiencies. So trying to do things better, trying to do things faster, hiring more people to get the same stuff done, but they weren't reducing. And so the high performers moved to high performance through active reduction. And the companies that started to achieve success were doing the same thing. And the percentage of numbers was similar too. So that there is an art of reduction that isn't taught. You may be in sport and you may have noticed it isn't core knowledge, system thinking, and what to reduce. So if we move on to another area, which is the difference, why is reduction so important? And so you have knowledge experts, and you'll know those, and those who've been through the university system or even had certain experts they've worked with may not have been in a performance mindset. They may have been in a capturing knowledge, gathering knowledge mindset. And there's a difference between that knowledge expert and a performance expert. So an athlete cannot deliver everything they know and not look clumsy. So there is knowing what and then knowing how. And the athlete is a great example to study because they have to know how it applies, and they are actively reducing. So when you see a tennis match and they're in flow, as they call it, as a spectator, you're in it. Like, aren't we? There's a connection that you're seeing, you're feeling it, that, oh, there's something going on here. And it's all trimmed down to just the right move at the right time. And flow isn't just a performance. So we can get flow in life. Reduction is how flow happens, because it reduces all the thinking, and we've driven things right down to a core. And this is a daily habit. So the highest performer doesn't just call on flow when it's a peak, and it doesn't just happen rarely. It can be daily. There's a sense that things are moving. I just know what happens and why it happens and what's needed. And they're also able to respond and adapt, because when you know what the basics are, suddenly you know how to adapt to what isn't actually normal, or a lane 8 or a wind or a crosswind. You don't have a lot of clutter, so you can deal with what's in front of you and deal with reality. So there's a lot of advantage that the highest performer sees through reduced clutter. And so it's a lot like this. So a system is basically a box, because you may wonder what is a system. And a system is the integration of people and processes, and it's how things happen and why it happens. And if you don't have a system, then it's hard to know what the next step is. And when you've got a system and you know it, so it's like a blue box. So here's a blue dot on a blue wall. And basically we are blue dots on a blue wall. And you can't see the system you're in. So the value of a coach, and no repeat medalist, no medalist is uncoached. So they all have a coach, and the coach replays the system. And it's all the integrated parts around the athlete that needs to be reduced, but you have to see it to be able to reduce it. And you can't see it because you're in it. And like the fish can't see the sea, you can't see the system you're in because you are in it, doing stuff in it. And when it's replayed back to you, suddenly things stand out because you are the expert in your own system, which is the picture of the puzzle. You are the expert. You may not be able to describe what the pieces are, but you are in it and no one else can describe it. You are the lived experience of your system. And so when it's replayed back by a coach or someone who can kind of see a system, things stand out. I don't know why I do that. That's a repeated pattern. Why have I bothered doing that all this time? The Jenga game starts and blocks start to come off that looked like they were really important. And we're doing reviews now for a couple of sports, a few sports in New Zealand. And this is the period after the games where you see the system that created the performance in Tokyo. And then when it's replayed back, which is my job for these three projects, to replay the system back, the experts in the room, their eyes light up and they spot performance advantage. And my approach with them is the performance advantage is subtraction. It isn't addition. Most high performance sport problems are addition problems, and they need a subtraction solution. And I see the same thing in other areas of performance where people are looking to achieve a certain result and they are adding, and there isn't a system pullback to say, you know what, 50% of what I'm doing doesn't matter. I am busy as, but it doesn't quite matter. And when you know the system you're in, and it can be an education system, it can be a class system, for instance. So it could be the teachers you work with, all of the system integrates. And you might find that, well, you know, in amongst all this lockdown chaos, I know the system I'm in. I know what I need to do next, and it's going to work out okay. And there's quite a lot that I don't know, but it's all right. The system has proven itself to me, and I can adapt and respond. And there's a few things I think I should reduce. A bit of a personal Jenga game. I think I could pull a few things off and not try to do everything. And we're all in a performance game, and it looks, if I just show you something here on I'll just draw it out with that. So over here we've got an example. Everyone's performance is exactly the same. So so it goes up. So when you're just starting out, everything's good. And then there's a plateau, and this is for everybody. There's a plateau, it happens, it's a learning plateau, and then it either accelerates and goes up or it drops off. Very simple performance model. And so you'll be on here somewhere, where no matter if it's a work or personal or sport. And so if you look at the divisions between the two here, 3 areas. So here's our plateau. And the point of the work I do is to shrink it. It happens. So you can't avoid a plateau. It's going to happen. But here's where everything gets added up because it's all new. So I'm brand new at it. I have to learn. So adding, and you don't see the problem with the subtraction yet. It hasn't hit you. Now it hits. And there's a plateau, but you've added all this stuff. And so now there's an automatic game of plus and minus. What do I need? I probably need more. Is it more of this? Typically it's more. Typically it's more. This doesn't come in because this means you've got to know your system, or at least be thinking about how things are interconnected. This means the magic's got to be somewhere. Maybe it's innovation. So I was saying for four years, I worked, I set up the innovation program in Britain. That's how I ended up here. And we integrated Formula One technology and military technology into Olympic sport. And I was fascinated with sport tech, and that's how I got into it. It just looked like there were a lot of connections that could provide a huge technological benefit to British Olympic sport. And the projects became very complicated, but they were very interesting. Everyone loved to be part of innovation. But the more I worked with the sports, I realized the ones that didn't know their basics and they didn't know their system were taking everything and trying to integrate it. You know, they were taking the solution and looking for the problem. Whereas the highest performing sport was taking only what would fit their system. And so when I came here, because the Kiwis wanted the same program, so in I come, and then there was integration of some America's Cup tech and military again, and you know, animation research down here in Ian Taylor's group and software, and fantastic thinking in New Zealand for innovation, fantastic. And so there was even more projects here. But again, if you don't know your system, and you don't know the basics of what works for you, it all looks attractive. And so it was a big add up game. And I found all the conversations were around how to reduce. And so you've got a choice here. So there's an inflection point here because this is going to happen. And the way to shorten it is subtraction. It isn't adding. It's never been adding. It's subtracting. You can shorten this plateau because everybody doesn't want to hang out here. Even though there's good learning, don't want to hang out here. And then we want this. And what happens here, it looks like add, but it's subtract. And what happens is we're adding. So we've got this point. And if we're not trained properly on this, the Jenga game, most people hit here, they come back up again, but it's a long experiment. And you know, Olympic sport doesn't have a long time. So 4 years might be an athlete's lifespan. And if you've got a few of these cycles, you're down here and your time's up. So the accelerator is learning how to subtract, keeping the subtraction going. And this was that protection you see in the highest performing athlete. They know how to protect the system that works for them. And Mahe Drysdale, he won 2 Olympic gold medals, and he had a fantastic quote after, a couple of actually fantastic quotes, but one after Beijing. when they were just exploring force gates and some new tech work on the boats. And they said, wow, all this technology, how do you keep track of it? And he said, oh, it's very simple. He said, I know exactly what works. And so he said, I innovate a bit. If it doesn't work, I go back to what works. I test some other innovation. If it doesn't work, I go back to what works. So a perfect example of knowing the system, protecting the system, and then leveraging it. So when you've got a system that works for you, it doesn't matter what's happening around you. So it brings the flow, it brings a calmness, brings a peace. There's a whole lot of added well-being in a system that's been reduced and in a picture that you know that works. So if I come to a couple of things that this is 5:36 now, so probably just a few more minutes, and then if there's any questions, you are more than welcome to ask. So here's an example of some work called Expert Performers Clock. This is, I'll share the website too, because I have a short paper, about 6 pages, free, download it, and it talks about this information here. And so I'll show you that. But if we just look at a few that might be applicable here. So at 12 o'clock, there's a difference between, so the top one is the lower performer and the bottom one is the high performer. And so hope versus evidence, and you've heard, affirmation and, if you believe it, you can achieve it. But the high performers have evidence that they can achieve it. They have proof that they can achieve it. And the high performers, what we noticed was when they become hopeful, they ask the next question: what evidence am I missing? So if I have hope, if I'm hoping for something to happen, the high performer looks at that and says, well, I must be missing some evidence. It doesn't mean they are not hopeful. So there's all the positive going through them, but they are facts about reality. And they look at, just like going into, say, Elon Musk's house, say, and you sit at his kitchen for a coffee and you see all these Post-it notes on his fridge. Go, Elon, you can do it. Today's your day. Nail it, nail it. You'd think, that's weird. You know what I mean? So if someone is producing, they have the evidence, they're producing. And so just like repeat medalists, they get to the point where all the prep is now starting to prove itself in compound interest. So they look back and they say, well, I've done this before. So the developing medalist, the newcomer, when they're focused on evidence, they're starting to ground themselves in high performance. So if it's all hopes and affirmations, you can camouflage your brain into thinking, I think I have enough evidence. This is just going to work out fine. Maybe not. And with evidence, there's a clear picture of current reality, and there's a stepping stone into high performance. Another one over here, fixing versus creating. So a difference between repeat medalist, high performer, and not is that they are not fixing anymore. So you'll find probably in your own life, you may have worked with somebody and oh, what you need is, and you need to do this, and you're just so lazy. And well, there's advantages to everything we've got because you are your full color palette, we call it. So you've got a lot inside you that doesn't need to be exactly like this box and exactly like this box. It's your picture. It's getting to know your picture. So for instance, I raced as a pro. After the Olympics, I signed a pro contract. I was a track cyclist, and to sign a pro contract was unusual. And I jumped on it, and I was the sprinter for a road team. And we had a young guy on the team who had ADHD and OCD, so obsessive compulsive and attention deficit. So he was unique, very unique. But we had a brilliant coach and brilliant manager. And what he did was gave him the task of keeping track of, we had so much gear, and he kept track of it all. And he tracked our packing lists. And so he gave him a job that only he could do. He was a master. We never lost anything. And so instead of saying, oh, we need to get you to the psych, we need to sort this out. So no, he looked at it as a creative performance solution. There was another, when I worked with rowing, there was an athlete who was a world champion, but she was highly anxious for 2 months before a Worlds or an Olympics. And so it looked like all hands on deck to help her. So the sports psych team, there was external consultants and all this anxiety, it's debilitating and we need to fix this. She was safe. There's definitely areas where people need support. Absolutely. So we're not talking about, unsafe areas. These are just performance problems. So the coach realized when he would coach her and give her cues based on evidence, her confidence lifted. And he thought, I wonder if I'm just not giving her enough evidence. I'm not replaying. And he just started to, provide her also in truthful evidence about how she's going and the power she's got and her biomechanics and her injury rates are reduced. And it was numbers, and her anxiety disappeared for her. So it was more evidence more often is what he did. So instead of taking her offline, he created a performance solution. And the other quote from Mahe was fantastic to show the difference between that mentality. And so after Beijing, he won a bronze. He was expected to win a gold, but he was ill. And the reporter after the Olympics said to him, oh, you got to be really disappointed. You got a bronze here and because you're ill. What are you going to do to be healthy next time? And he said, oh, I can't control that. He said, I'm just going to train harder so I can win when I'm sick. And there is a creator. And they don't fix it, there's no time. So all these things that, like, I started off by saying characteristics, they are rabbit holes. And when we go down the rabbit hole of trying to be the ultimate somebody to start doing the job, we're not actually stepping into doing the job. So you are exactly who you need to be. Every high performance athlete is. And it's about finding how to optimize what you've got, like Usain Bolt with his height. All the research, there's published articles that say that lever he's got, the length of his lever, his legs, his height, means too much inertia, and he's not going to be a sprinter. Well, he is a sprinter. And he was a sprinter, and he showed all of the naysayers that his strengths actually turned out to be his competitive advantage. So we will leave it there. If you go on to this here, I'll just show you on this website. It's called Simplify 2 with a number 2 Perform, and on here is a whole lot of free stuff on here, like these papers down here. So what is measured in high performance? 6 questions we repeatedly use, and which is this paper here. And so there's repeated questions to find what matters and uncover your own system. And then that clock that I showed you was in here. And so the 5,000 is just a take on if you reduce, you can accelerate. And then if you're interested, as Andrew had said, have a book out now, and that's the system of how all this is interconnected. So the 5,000 hours is the what, and the system is the Simplify is the system on how it's interconnected in 9 parts. So that is it for me. I hope that's been helpful. I hope there was something that was useful to learn there, and maybe you'll head in and grab some of the free stuff. There's a newsletter you can sign up to. So and it's all related to this: simplify, reduce, subtract, and perform. So a pleasure being with you. And if there's any questions, I'll just check the chat here. Not sure, Tim or Andrew, if oh, here we go.
Yeah, Richard, thank you so much for that. It's fascinating to get that level of detail. We don't hear so much about Olympians and repeated medalists so much, and your research is pretty world leading in that area, which is fantastic. So thank you so much. And I think the Jenga analogy will probably have resonated with a lot of people. Can I just ask, from someone who's fairly new to this, which where should we be looking to remove the blocks? Which ones, where would you start looking if if this is applying this to your home life or work? What are the blocks that have to stay no matter what? And what are some of the things that you think, yeah, I'd be looking to move that one or that can go? Do you have any advice or guidance for people who are really keen to get going on simplifying something but don't really quite know where to start?
Yeah, yeah. So if you try the Jenga game analogy in your own life, and you have a little, you have a little game, sort of an analogy game here. What could go and what would you notice if it went? So we start this way with athletes. So list the stuff you do. It's like a mind map. So you list the stuff you do, and what would you notice if it disappeared? And what you discover, some things have no connection to anything else at all. And other things have a very strong, deep connection to a few things. So, for instance, very simple analogy is a car. And so an athlete had a car that was a clunk. And so the problem was they would be at training late. It wouldn't start and they'd have to call for a ride. And they looked at their system and they hadn't spent a thing on that, but they were buying games and Oculus and a whole bunch of other things, but they weren't getting to training fast enough. And they just looked at the scale of the cost and they thought, for $200, I can fix my car and maybe drop, and they made a decision. And so they simplified. Not only did that create a bit of time, but they saw the interconnection. The games had no impact on their performance goal. The car had a lot of impact. They just didn't see it. And once they mapped it out and mapped out what they do with their day, like your time, from the time you get up, what do you do? And what do you do at school? For instance, if you're a student, what do you do when you get back? And where are you aiming? What really matters to you? And then just draw like a tree, which one's connected to what. And all you have to do is find one thing that doesn't connect, and that's your start point.
Thank you, Richard. Really insightful. And just please, if you're still listening, fire some questions through. We're happy to take them till, we'll probably go till just before 6 o'clock. Richard, one thing just on behalf of the boys, they've all got some pretty important exams coming up, and lots of things on the horizon to finish off, for our seniors to finish off their year, and for some finish off their time at Westlake in total. Do you have any advice or guidance for those boys in terms of preparation for these exams, the equivalent of their Olympics almost? Any advice or guidance on preparation for them?
Yeah. So let's go back to this right here. So having talked to a lot of students about these areas and just testing, what looks to be most meaningful to you, this one often stands out in terms of preparation, and same for athletes as well, but we're drawing the analogy to learning. A busy environment is a limiter. And when you've got a stable environment, it means you're starting to figure out what matters to you. So for instance, one student told me she was studying for a level 8 piano, and there was something, it was like a Juilliard school, and it was a top end exam. And she found that she used parts of this, and she happened to pass me and said, oh, I used parts of that to get into the Juilliard school. And I was, oh, how'd you do that? And she says, well, I realized that my environment was too cluttered. My little brother would keep coming in every time I tried to practice. So I put a sign on the door to say, I'll give you $1 if you stay out every time I'm practicing. So suddenly she had space. She looked at this part here, the mentoring, solo versus mentored, which is a coach. And her coach had never taught anybody to Juilliard and was kind of giving it a go. And so she felt, when she thought about it, that I'm actually doing this myself. I don't have a coach. And so she changed her teacher. And then she found that she wasn't doing soul with any sort of deep thinking about the feel of the piano, is how she described it. So she was going through the process, but she wasn't. And this is like a number one for high performers. They are exceptionally self-aware. So they might not like what they see, but they are exceptionally self-aware. And that is where flow, that's where the deep learning comes in. So she started to reflect what this was meaning to her while she was playing. And she described those three things as having making the biggest difference on her preparation: simplifying her environment, figuring out the right coach, which could be, the kind of teacher. How often do you communicate with your teacher? Do you supplement with, I don't know, Khan Academy or something? Do you supplement? Are you mentored? And then what are you sensing when you're in your study? Are you an automatron, or are you just looking again? Okay, I'm making progress here. I'm starting to figure this out, because that's where our brain starts to connect the dots when we bring learning inside. So those turn out to be, and for new athletes, key changers for them when they're trying to learn a new trick, learn a new approach, learn a new training regime. Those three are where they tend to concentrate.
Brilliant, brilliant, Richard. Thank you. We've just got a couple of questions just come in. I'm just going to have a look. Yeah, this one, Richard, how do you work out what is just noise and what is usable advice from other performance experts? It's a saturated market, I suppose, is the point we're getting at. How can you sort of sort out the wheat from the chaff when it comes to people talking about performance?
Yeah, great question. Because you look at anybody, even me right now, you're probably thinking, oh, I got to add that. I got to add that. You may be there. And when you hear somebody like, a famous athlete, you're not necessarily listening for the principle. We talked about the puzzle, the corners and the edges. It's to ask the next question. What are they saying? Like the busy environment, make sure you've got a piano that works. Well, actually, if you look deeper than that, it's actually the repeatability of my environment. High performing environments are very repeatable. So high performers can look very boring, like they've got a routine that just works. And they've built that routine because they have questioned the principles behind every addition. So when you're hearing somebody, it's asking, what are they actually talking about? So altitude. Everybody's going to altitude, for instance. Well, why? Oh, well, it's a blood booster, natural blood booster, and that's what I need. So if I look at my event, is that important? And yes or no. And if I look at me, is that my limiter? Well, no, I'm injured. No, I have. So there's other aspects that mean, okay, good principle, but the picture for me does not include this. So the two parts: look for the principle and what you're hearing, and then relate it to your current system. And that's also how we learn about our system, because at first it's going to be really difficult. It's just going to look like an add up. It's going to be difficult, to find our system, because everything will look attractive. So in the innovation area, there was a new pillow that came out, and there were two sports that called and said, we need this pillow. And one sport, when I went through their process, had a recovery process that was deep for every athlete. The other one had no recovery process. So the one that was deep, we looked through the pillow, the principle of the pillow, it just didn't fit. It wasn't going to add anything to what they had. They made an easy decision because they looked at the principle behind the research relative to their system, said not going to fit. The other one bought the pillows, no questions asked, and handed them out to the athletes and said, here, you're going to get a good night's sleep. Well, there was no incentive. They didn't see the system. It was just a pillow. And so now it's, well, is it comfortable or not? There was something missed. So they missed the potential for a deeper recovery program. The value of sleep, the principle behind sleep, what's actually happening when you have a hard day training and then you rest? What's happening to your brain? What's happening to your muscles? And going deeper in. So there's the point, is to listen principle and then direct relationship to me. And what do I squeeze out? Because everything you add takes the space of something else. So what is going to get squeezed out?
Thank you, Richard. That's a really great answer about something getting squeezed out as well. I think we all feel that pinch sometimes. And tonight, really, or this afternoon's just been a really, for me, a great point of reflection. I think we've all probably been guilty of just adding up and hoping that all the adding up finds a solution. But just the time to sit back and listen and think about taking away and how valuable that can be. I really thank you for that. And so many people will have found this fascinating. I know I certainly have, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in person sometime at our school. And we do encourage everyone to get a copy of Richard's book, because it is fascinating, and it goes into a lot greater and deeper detail than what he can ever cover in 45 minutes or an hour. So Richard, on behalf of everyone at Westlake, thank you so much. You put your hand up to do this for our community, and we really, really appreciate it. So thank you ever so much. And to all of you out there listening, we have recorded this. We are going to put it up on our YouTube channel. So if there's any bits and pieces that you want to reflect on or go back over, this will be up in the next couple of days. So that's to all of our audience. But yeah, Richard, it's a massive thank you. We're so grateful for what you've done, and we really wish you all the best with the book and how you're going to move in this high performance area even more for the good of all of New Zealand sport, which is brilliant. So thanks again, and we wish you well.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the invite. Thanks to David as well. Thanks for everyone who joined too. Fantastic initiative. So no wonder your school is top shelf with the kind of work you do in around the teaching classroom. So yeah, congratulations, and a very honored to contribute.
Thank you. Right, everyone, have a great afternoon. Have a great rest of the evening, and we will no doubt we'll catch up soon. And Richard, once again, awesome. Thank you so much.
See you again. Bye now.
Thank you.